Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at the ABCs of the ASQ. I'm going to give it about 1 more minute just to see if anybody else is joining, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I know your time is very valuable, so I want to move on with the presentation here. Okay, as usual, we're going to very quickly cover the attendance credits, pre and post test and evaluations. So as you know, all ELC Broward trainings are for in-service hours only. Your training certificate will be emailed within 24 hours and sent to the email address that you entered when you registered. In order to be marked as attended, you must log in on the computer, or you can download the GoToWebinar app on your phone. Just know that calling in does not register your attendance, so you'll not receive a certificate marked as attended. If you cannot see the screen, then we also cannot see that you're here in attendance. Starting July 1st, all trainings will have the pre and post test of 3 questions to answer. And then upon completion of the training, a post test is going to pop up along with the 5 survey questions that are going to launch. So please complete all of that information. It gives us a lot of good info as to how you felt about the training and what we need to do differently. So where housekeeping is concerned, we do have the questions box. I know that many of you are already very familiar with this GoToWebinar platform, but just in case there are a few of you who don't know, there is the questions box. You're just going to click on that chat icon at the top of your toolbar, use the send drop-down menu to select your recipient of the message, or just send it to everyone. We also have a handouts part of the toolbar there, and there's a handout icon. You're going to tap that icon, select the file to download. It's going to download automatically. And when you see this image that I have here, that pink piece of paper that's dog-eared on the slides, it'll kind of remind you to know that there is a handout regarding that section of the PowerPoint. We do have my partner here manning the chat box today. It's the wonderful Adrienne Gilliard. She's a fellow inclusion specialist. Thank you so much, Adrienne, for being here.
No problem. Hello, everyone.
And so any question that you will type into the chat box, Adrienne will be there to answer it. Please remember that the questions need to be typed in English so that she's able to understand and answer them, okay? All right, this is me, Carolina White. I'm an inclusion specialist here at the Early Learning Coalition of Broward County. I've been in the education field for about 19 years now, and it is absolutely my occupation. I call it that because it's where my passion and my career connect. So I also share my life with a husband who also happens to be my best friend of 26 years, and we have 2 awesome teenage daughters. We have a very energetic 8-year-old dog named Marley who's sleeping here under my desk. And I love to dance, especially salsa dancing. And my favorite food in the world is sushi. So that's a little bit about me. We're going to talk about the training objectives. Some things we're going to cover here are that we're going to describe the benefits of screening. We're going to describe the features of the ASQ3 and ASQ SE2. We'll discuss appropriate follow-up and referrals. We'll describe appropriate ways to include families in administering the ASQ3 and ASQ SE2, and we're going to describe appropriate conversations with families. So to start off, if you could choose on a scale from 1 to 10, how comfortable are you with administering the ASQ? If you could just type a number into the chat box, Adrian will read that out for me so I can get a good idea for how many people on here are very comfortable or somewhat comfortable or not comfortable at all by the number that you choose.
Just got a big, strong number 10, Carolina.
Nice.
10, another 10.
Okay.
So far, it looks like we have all 10s. They are very comfortable. Okay, we have a somewhat number 5.
Okay, wonderful. Good. Yeah, there is no wrong or right answer. I mean, if you're very comfortable, that's excellent. If you're not comfortable at all, that is also excellent, because hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll be a little more comfortable. So maybe I can move those 10s up to an 11. All right, we're going to go ahead and start talking about what is the screening. So the screening is basically an accurate tool that identifies children, their development. So are they on schedule? Those are the types of questions we're going to ask ourselves. Do they need an in-depth assessment? It's going to identify children who would benefit from extra practice or support in certain areas that the ASQ covers. And it's going to also identify children that are at risk for developmental delays. So we want to try to figure that out as quickly as possible so that we can refer for evaluation. It's really going to answer that big question, does the child need an in-depth assessment? I do want to highlight the differences between screening and evaluation before we move on. So a screening detects delays and celebrates milestones. It determines if further evaluation is necessary, like I mentioned on the previous slide. It provides brief developmental snapshots, and it indicates when monitoring is needed. Whereas an evaluation provides a comprehensive assessment. It defines the nature and extent of the problem. It determines if a diagnosis is appropriate, and it establishes if the child is eligible for services. So who gets the ASQ3 and the ASQ SE2? All of our children receiving school readiness must be screened with the ASQ3 as providers are informed through the portal. They can be screened as needed using the ASQ SE2, and no consent is needed for that. The results of the ASQ SE2 can't be uploaded into the portal in the same way that the ASQ3 results are. So those you would just contact your inclusion specialist who would have already been in contact with you regarding the ASQ SE2, and she would talk you through that. And then children who do not receive school readiness can be screened with either of the ASQs that I mentioned by the provider if they get consent from the family. So results cannot be uploaded into the portal because they are not in the portal, but those results can be used to decide what next steps to take. So when is the ASQ3 given? Providers are notified when to administer the ASQ3 through the ELC portal. The ASQ3 is administered within 45 days of a child's enrollment, and then every year on the child's birthday month. Who administers the ASQ3? So it is best practice for families to complete it as they are the experts on their child. Teachers can also administer the ASQ3 as well if they spend 15 to 20 hours a week with the child. So we want it to be a teacher who knows the child best. It's very important in order to get the most accurate results. I know many of our schools have have started using the ASQ3, incorporating it in their enrollment packet, so that way the families fill it out initially as well, which is a wonderful thing to do. So you want to keep in mind that results of screening are going to inform you that most children are on schedule and doing great. Some children will benefit from practice in specific areas, like, for example, fine motor skills. If they score in the monitor range or even in the concern range, it might just mean that they need a little bit more practice, and we'll go ahead and send some activities and help you to come up with ideas in which you can help that child to improve in that specific area. So it just might mean they need a little extra support in that area. And then you may have a few children who are going to need a referral for further evaluation. You want to also remember that a screening does not diagnose a delay or a disability. Okay, it does not identify specific child goals or skills to target. It only gives information on the general areas of development and what we're seeing in that particular snapshot when the teacher or the parent gives the ASQ. So when it comes to engaging families, we know that the family is the primary force in preparing children for school and life. Children benefit when all of the adults who care for them work together. It encourages parents to provide developmentally appropriate activities, and it is best practice for parents to receive the results of the ASQ. That part is very important. We want to make sure that the schools who are filling in the ASQ are giving the parents the results so that they know where their child is falling within that range on the ASQ. We do have a handout here, so if you want to download it, it is about helping parents understand the benefits of the developmental screening. We want to keep in mind that screening, assessment, and evaluation should always be conducted in a very natural, non-threatening setting and involve tasks that are relevant to the child and the family. Children are going to demonstrate through their capacities, their true capacities, when they're in a place that is secure and familiar, right? And with people whom they know and trust, which is why we ask that the teacher, if a teacher is going to fill it out, it's the teacher who knows the child best. Infants and young children may be particularly sensitive to unfamiliar caregivers and separation from trusted adults. So it is very important, again, to have the family give it if possible, and if not, to have a teacher give it who is familiar with the child. So when you're using a parent-completed tool, you're sending the expectation that parents are going to be involved in their child's education. You're going to convey the message that you value and you feel that the parent's expertise is important. And you're also going to help educate parents about development. True collaboration involves the reciprocal sharing of information between parents and providers. So the expectation is important for staff and families alike. And here we also have a handout, and it's a wonderful guide for you to use as a parent conference sheet. If you decide to have a conference, it's always a great way to bring a parent in and kind of sit down and talk about what you're seeing on the ASQ. So research states that most parents are very reliable and accurate when reporting on their child's development. ASQ3 research found that 93% agreement between parents and professionals, meaning if a parent gave the ASQ and a teacher gave the ASQ, they're about 93% in agreement. Parent concerns are highly predictive of child outcomes. As we know, parents are the experts on the child. So we want to always keep that in mind when we receive back an ASQ that a parent filled out. We will at times find differences in the parent and professional report. I often hear teachers' concerns about parents being in denial or overestimating their child's skills. However, errors in reporting actually go in both directions. Professionals, like teachers and educators, tend to underestimate a child's skills. Think of a 2-year-old child. What happens when somebody they don't know tries to talk to them, right? So if a teacher that doesn't really know the child tries to give them the ASQ and the child is not performing or doing the tasks that the teacher asks, then the teacher is very likely to just write not yet, even though it just may be that they don't know the child well enough yet. So we do find that professionals may underestimate a child's skill. There's higher agreement for easily observed behaviors. Parents report more emerging skills, right? So if a parent knows like, oh yeah, I've seen my child do this every once in a while, they're more likely to put that yes, they are doing it. And then children do different things in different settings. And we want to always keep that in mind when we're thinking about a parent's ASQ score versus what we're seeing at school. It's completely different settings, so it's natural and typical for the scores to be a little different. So the ASQ3 covers 5 domains of development. The ASQ SE2 was actually developed as a companion tool for the ASQ3 in order to address the need for age-appropriate tools to monitor the social and emotional domain of development of very young children and determine if the parents and child would benefit from behavioral supports and or referrals. When we're talking about the ASQ3, I just want to briefly define some of these areas that it covers. So communication, that's going to be the child's language skills, what the child understands. So it's their receptive, what they're hearing and what they're understanding, as well as what they can say or how they communicate. Gross motor is going to be that child's large muscle movements, how well they use their arms and legs and other large muscles for sitting, crawling, walking, running, and other activities. The fine motor skills are going to be the child's hand and finger movements and how they coordinate it with hand-eye coordination, excuse me. Problem solving focuses on how the child plays with toys and solves problems. And personal social is going to be the child's self-help skills and their interactions with others. So the ASQ3 covers each of those sections. Now we're going to do a very quick activity here where you're going to need to type into the chat box. So I know Adrian is ready. Be ready to type in there if you are, if you're going to participate in this activity with us. So what can you suggest to provide opportunities to develop communication skills? So if a child is falling in the monitor zone for communication, which one of these activities to the right of your screen would you recommend in order to enhance that skill? Choose one and just type it into the chat box. And then Adrian, when you have a chance, start letting me know what you're seeing.
Okay. I don't see anything yet.
Okay. I know it's a little hard to participate when it's a webinar, but I would love it if some of you could kind of participate here with me so I'm not just feeling like I'm talking to myself. All right. Well, this is the first time we've had no participation, so I guess I'll go ahead and.
Okay, we have one. We have one. Puzzles. Someone said puzzles.
Okay.
Pictures at eye level.
Wonderful. Okay, well, if you chose pictures at eye level, you are correct. Now, that doesn't mean that for communication, some of the others wouldn't work because they absolutely would. I just wanted to pick the one that is most kind of obvious for that particular skill. So for example, when you're putting family pictures at children's eye level, you're encouraging conversation between the children, and it's going to also present opportunities for teachers to ask questions about the children's family, which will then help engage in that back and forth exchange of information. So for that one, family pictures at eye level would probably be the best. Then, if you could please participate, what can you suggest to provide practice in gross motor skills? Which one of these activities to the right would be kind of the most obvious one that you would choose for gross motor skill practice? Feel free to type it into the chat box.
Okay, you have running in the playground.
Excellent.
And asked about, okay, never mind. But yeah, running in the playground, running in the playground. So you got a lot of those.
Yes, and that is the correct answer. So pat on the back, everybody. Excellent job participating. Thank you. So running on the playground helps to further develop gross motor skills because it engages a child's large muscles. The trunks of their bodies, their arms and their legs, they're all in motion when they're running around on the playground. So that activity will definitely help with muscle strength and tone, balance, coordination, stability, and posture. Excellent job. Okay, we've got a couple more, so stay with me. What can you suggest to provide opportunities for fine motor skills? Which of these would you say?
Hand motion, matching letters, puzzles.
Excellent. Thank you. Fine motor skills, oops, excuse me, something happened here. There we go. Fine motor skill activities involve manual dexterity. It often requires coordinating movement of the hands and fingers with the eyes, which is called hand-eye coordination, as we know. And those are the components of fine motor skills that include being able to grip and manipulate objects, using both hands for a task, using just the thumb and one finger to pick something up. So puzzles would be the most obvious one for that. Excellent. And what about personal social skills? Which one of these three would you choose as the best option?
Shapes in the box, classroom jobs.
Okie dokie.
Yes, classroom jobs, peekaboo, a lot of classroom jobs.
Okay. So actually playing peekaboo, and that's not to say classroom jobs wouldn't do it, because absolutely I can see why you would have chosen that. That's an excellent choice. But personal development is all about how children come to understand who they are and what they can do. It also covers how children come to understand themselves in relation to others, how they make friends, understand the rules of society, and behave towards others. And lastly, we've got problem solving. Okay, we'll just
matching letters.
Yes, excellent. Matching letters. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on to scoring the ASQ. So here, if I was doing this webinar in person, this would be the time where I would hand out an actual ASQ to everyone with the summary page so that we could go through it. But I'm going to do my best to do this virtually, which makes it a little more complicated. But feel free to type into the chat box if you have any questions as I'm going through this. So this is the front page of an example of a 16-month-old ASQ questionnaire. Okay, so these questionnaires do not account for prematurity. So keep that in mind as you are choosing the questionnaire for the child's age. Now, if you look right above where it says 16-month questionnaire, in very fine print, it says that this questionnaire actually can be used for a child that is 15 months and 0 days through 16 months and 30 days. So it's very important to use the correct questionnaire for the child that you are assessing. Let's see. This would just be the front page. You would fill that information in about the child. And let's move on to the next page here. This is an example of the gross motor section for a 30-month-old questionnaire. I just wanted to give you an example so that you could see. As you see, it has one milestone, right? Does your child run fairly well, stopping herself without bumping into things or falling? And then you would choose either yes, sometimes, or not yet. Okay, so based on the answer that you mark, is the points that you would put on the line to the right. So if you chose yes, then that would be 10 points. If you chose sometimes, that would be 5 points. And if you chose not yet, that would be 0 points. And you would just kind of go down the list, each one, and choose the answer that best fits what the child is capable of doing. Now, it is highly recommended that you have the child do these particular things so that you can see them and you're not just going based off of memory, because as teachers, you have many students and sometimes it's easy to get a little bit confused as to what each child can do. So it is recommended to have them do it. So for example, number 2, does your child walk either up or down at least 2 steps by himself? You would have that child go to a part of your school, maybe the playground, and see if they can go up the steps to the playground. Or if it's a ball, if you're, without holding on to anything for support, does your child kick a ball by swinging his leg forward? You want to actually give him a ball and see if he can do it, okay? Very, very important. So we're going to play a video next, which actually gives you a good idea of how the ASQ is scored, since I can't do it with you in person. Give me 1 second while I get it together to play this video. Adrian, if you could let me know once you see it.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks. So, whoops.
There's nothing playing yet. There's no video on the screen yet. It just says the ABCs of it.
Give me 1 second. I'm still getting it up. Okay, Adrian, are we back? Can you see?
Yes, we're back. I see your screen.
Okay, beautiful.
Mhm.
It's kind of stressful for a second there. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so here we have step one. I thought that video kind of very nicely illustrated how you go through the ASQ and scoring it, just because we are virtual. It's a little harder for me to show you that. But basically, step one is you're going to review those responses. So this is, she was showing it as if she was scoring what a parent had brought in. But same thing, if a teacher fills it in, you're going to review the responses. If there's any missing items, you're going to try to obtain those answers. If the item is inappropriate, you're just going to mark it as omitted. You'll calculate the area totals just like she showed you there. So any yes answer is going to be worth 10 points, sometimes is worth 5, and a not yet is worth 0. And if there are any items omitted, you're going to calculate the new area total, which we will look at on the next slide. Sometimes items are omitted because maybe the parent couldn't answer it, or maybe culturally or religiously it's not something that they do. They might have it omitted, and that's perfectly fine. We just want to make sure here on this slide that we see how, how to deal with an omitted item. So for example, if we're looking at the area of personal social, and let's say that the parent filled this in, you're going to see here that pretty much all items are filled in yes, except for number 6, which is a sometimes, and the scores are there to the right. Now, item number 4 was left blank. It could be even that the parent or the teacher forgot to do it. But when you come to scoring it, there's a particular way you need to do it so that it's most accurate. So up here to the right, we've got 10, 10, 10, and then we're going to assume that that following line is blank where the 9 is. And then we've got a 10 for number 5 and a 5 for number 6. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to add all those numbers up, 10, 20, 30, 45, right? So we have a total of 45 without number 4 being filled in. And the way we would fill number 4 in is by taking that 45 and dividing it by the amount of numbers that we had. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 45 divided by 5 gives us 9, and that's what we put in that omitted space. Okay, then we add everything together, which gives us that 54 at the bottom, which is that adjusted score. Just to kind of show you with the kind of like a formula here, you're basically calculating the average item score, which is 45, divided by the number of items answered, which was 5, equals 9. That's the average item score. And then you calculate your new domain total, which is the 45 that you initially had, plus the 9 that you filled in to give you that score of 54. Right here, there's also the Ages and Stages Questionnaire Age Calculator. It's an app. It's a great app to help you figure out which ages and stages questionnaire to give a child based on their birth date. It's got lots of great information, so that's the website right there if you're interested. And then I did want to show you the last page here, which was the summary page that she kind of showed at the end. I know the video is a little blurry and it's not easy to see, but as you can see here, under number 1, it does tell you the yes is worth 10, sometimes worth 5, and not yet is worth 0. So then after you've added all of the scores for each domain that you covered, you're going to fill them in here. So for communication, this child got a 30. For gross motor, they got a 50, and so on. And then you write that total score in there, but then you also bubble it in on the spectrum here to the right. So for communication, we know that the child received a 30, and you can see there is an X there under the number 30, which does put that child in the gray area, which is that area to monitor. So you can see where this child fell in each of the areas. It's kind of a quick overview for you to be able to see like, wow, okay, this child really needs monitoring in communication, in fine motor skills, and in problem solving. And then in gross motor skills and in personal social skills, they fell in the typical range, which is that white area. So for a quick knowledge check, if you could please participate, I'd really appreciate it. How many points does a yes equal to on the ASQ that we just covered? Type in the points for a yes.
Someone said 20 points.
Okay, so
5. We have some different answers coming in. So we have 20, we have 5, and it looks like another 20.
okay, so really quickly, a yes on the ASQ, and I'm just going to go back to that page to show you here. A yes, you see right here where it says score and transfer totals. A yes is worth 10 points, okay? A yes is worth 10, a sometimes is worth 5, and a not yet is worth 0. So let's try that again. How many points is a yes worth on the ASQ? Just the answer for a yes. How many points is that worth?
All right, so we have a lot of 10 points coming in. Someone said it was an accident that they said 20, but it was
Okay.
so we have 10 points.
Excellent. Yes, that is correct. So now, how many points does a sometimes equal on the ASQ?
5 points.
Wonderful. And then
All
how
right.
many points is a no worth? How many points does a no get?
0, we have 5.
Yeah, so sometimes it's a little hard because maybe they're still answering for the sometimes. So
So we have zeros.
zeros. Excellent. So a no is worth zeros. Thank you guys for participating in that quick knowledge check. All right, so once we have the ASQ scores, we need to interpret them and follow up, right? So you want to consider the following: the total ASQ 3 area scores, and we also want to consider the overall responses as well as the parent concerns. Sometimes I've had children score typical all the way across in all of the areas, meaning they fell in that white area on the summary page, but the parent is still very concerned that they're not speaking or communicating. So in that case, we take that parent concern, we validate it, and we go ahead and try to encourage a speech referral for evaluation. So there's some other factors that may impact a child's screening results. And something that we're seeing a lot in addition to what I'm going to talk about now is that the child was maybe gone for 2 or 3 months because of COVID, and then they came back and needed to have that ASQ done, and it was done a little bit too quickly. So when a child is away from the school setting for 2 months and then comes back and the ASQ is given, it might be a little bit too soon. And so we have some scores that don't reflect what's actually happening, which is fine, and we understand that. There's additional considerations though. We've got biological and health factors. There's home environment, which is kind of like opportunity or exposure. If you have a child who's in VPK or in the 4-year-old class and they can't hold a pencil yet, it may just be that they really have not had the opportunity or exposure to it at home. So it doesn't necessarily mean they need a referral for evaluation. They might just need a little bit more practice with fine motor skills. There's stress and trauma, availability of resources, and the family and cultural context. So you just want to keep those kind of in the back of your head to use as a guide when considering interpreting the ASQ3 scores. So we do have a handout, tips for screening children from diverse cultures, because it does play a role. So the home language, geography, parenting practices, parents' values and beliefs, and community and societal stress, perhaps deportation or isolation, all of these things play a role and impact the children and how they may develop. So an example of an issue may arise is like feeding or dressing, right? So a child in the 3-year-old ASQ may be expected to be able to pull up and down their own pants in order to receive a yes if that was a question. And we know that some cultures feed and dress their babies for much longer than Western cultures might do. They might not encourage self-feeding or self-dressing. And so that may just be an issue that they need to practice and work on rather than have an evaluation for. So that's what I mean by kind of keeping that in the back of your head and being attuned with your students and their families. So this is an example of how screening with ASQ and ASQ SE2 fits into the system to help identify children at risk for developmental delays. The process starts at the top, at the very top where you see it says universal screening. And then children will fall into one of the three categories. All right, so if they are all the way to the right, so the universal screening is the ASQ 3 or the ASQ SE2. And if they're all the way to the right, not near the cutoff, that was that white area that we saw, that means there are no concerns. They're in the typical zone for how they should be progressing. And you might just continue to monitor them and then rescreen them the following year. If they fall in that monitor area, which is that gray area, then you would need to kind of think, is it maybe a mild delay? Are they still on schedule and they just need a little extra practice? Or is this something that may be a concern, even though they fell in the monitor? And then if they're beyond the cutoff in the concerns area, which was that black part of the spectrum, then it's highly encouraged to do a referral for an evaluation. After that point, they would have the referral, and then we would decide, or not we, but they at Fiddlers or Early Steps would decide if they are eligible for any services that they provide, or if they just need a little bit of extra practice at school and at home. So that's kind of the way the map looks about how that works. So recommendations for follow-up, if they do fall in that typical zone, we mentioned that you would just continue to monitor them and then rescreen them in 12 months. If they are in the monitoring zone, then the inclusion specialist will usually provide follow-up activities to practice specific skills in those developmental areas at home and at school. So usually we encourage for the school to send those same activities that we give to the teacher, send them home so that the family is also doing those activities, and that everybody working together to help enhance those skills should work a little bit better. And then you would often rescreen those children in 2 months, which we, the inclusion specialist, would send a reminder to do so and or make referrals if that's appropriate. As you can see, we have the handout icon there. There is a handout for tips for children in the monitoring zone, so be sure to download that. And then if they fall below the cutoff, which is that black area on the spectrum, highly encourage you to refer for further assessment. Or if they do get referred and they are not eligible for Early Steps or Fiddlers, then we're going to rescreen in a few months after doing some targeted practice. If there is a parent concern, we want to always respond to any of those concerns and refer if necessary. Remember, the child can fall in the typical area for all of the domains, but if the parent says they have a concern, we should refer for an evaluation. All right, and here we have just a brief map of the process. So on the left side of the map, the family or the teacher does the ASQ. Based on the scores on the ASQ, we may refer. Now, if the child is under the age of 3, we would refer to Early Steps, which is the ES that's there. If they're between the ages of 3 and 5, we would refer to Fiddlers. Then Early Steps and Fiddlers will do their evaluation. And if the child qualifies for services, that team would write up an IFSP, which is an individual family support plan, if they are in Early Steps, or an IEP, which is an individual education plan if they're in the Fiddlers age group. And then the family would either get home or school visits, preschool services, or consultation with the school, whatever the IFSP or IEP recommends. If a child already has an IFSP or an IEP or a plan from a professional like psychologist or a therapist, the provider should always ask the family if they would be willing to share that IEP or IFSP so that they know what the goals are for the child and they can best help meet those needs. You would need written consent with the provider and ELC, and the provider relations specialist should be informed so that that child can then be removed from the portal. Because once a child has that, they no longer need to continue to receive the ASQ. Let's see, a formal evaluation always supersedes a screening. If the family doesn't want to share his or her child's plan, then the provider must continue to administer the ASQ3. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about the ASQ SE2. This one's a little bit different. The SE stands for social emotional, and that helps you to remember the difference between the two. And this one specifically focuses on social emotional. So we are going to have a brief video. Hang with me while I set this up. Okay, we are back. Adrian, just want to make sure you can see my screen.
I see it.
Okay, wonderful. Whew. All right, so what is the ASQ SE2, right? So it's a series of parent or caregiver completed questionnaires for children from 1 to 72 months. It is a tool that supports early identification of young children that are at risk for specifically social emotional delays. And it is a tool to identify and respond to parent concerns early, so child's behaviors don't become barriers to healthy relationships. Administering the ASQ SE2 is not required, as I mentioned at the beginning, by the ELC at this time. Inclusion specialists will often recommend it if the provider has shared a concern with some behaviors. If the child is not in the school readiness program, remember the parents must sign a consent, which the provider would create, and complete the ASQ SE2 based on their observations and experiences with their child during the day like through their daily routines. It is also highly, highly recommended to have the parents fill one out as well. This way you could have a meeting for what you're seeing at school versus what the parents are seeing at home and come together to kind of decide why we're seeing those discrepancies and what might be a difference there. Very often, the parents are seeing very similar behaviors at home when they're so extreme. Remember, there are no right or wrong answers. We know that children act differently in different settings and with different caregivers. So when they're the only child at home and all the toys are there for them to play with, it's very understandable that they might act differently at school when there's 15 other children that they're trying to share specific toys with. The earlier we can identify social emotional delays and or behaviors that are of concern to a parent, the more we can support that healthy relationship between children and their primary caregivers. So it's really an important questionnaire in order to find out some of that information. So some of the challenges in assessing social emotional development are the fact that antisocial behavior is actually very typical at different ages, and it's important to keep that in mind. So children vary in activity level and mood and sociability, attention control, and affect regulation. For example, head banging when frustrated, or crying when hungry, but then rejecting the food when you give it to them. Screaming at the picture of an elephant, or crying for mom, but then when mom comes to pick up the child, they reject her approach. Temper tantrums, making huge messes, toileting accidents, even typical sexual exploration can all be within normal limits depending on the age of the child. So self-regulation in all children moves from external to internal. It's influenced by temperament and it's linked to socialization. And it needs to be taught by adults who are the child's security base. So I really want you to keep that in mind when you're thinking about a child and should you give them the ASQ SE2, just remember what is typical for children. So like our slide shows here that infants tend to cry to get wants and needs met, right? They can't speak, they're not verbal, and so that's their way of communicating what they need. Toddlers can't share, they might bite or have frequent temper tantrums, and that is typical because also they may not be verbal at the time, right? So that's their way to express whatever it is that they need. Preschoolers often whine and make demands or grab and push and hit, and they are still learning how to share as well. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about things that are typical for a particular age when deciding if a behavior. It's not just necessarily like, I don't feel like dealing with whining today. Sometimes it's typical for their behavior. So some social emotional red flags would be what we call externalizing, right? Having severe tantrums, kicking, hitting, biting, and throwing toys and materials. And this is frequent, often, and it is severe. So we want to keep that in mind. Internalizing is that child that's very withdrawn. They're unengaged with people or the toys in the class. They're often sad and anxious and irritable. That is a behavior in itself, and we have to be very careful not to ignore that just because the child is quiet and maybe not being disruptive. They're just like hiding under the table and they can stay there all day if you let them. You want to make sure that you're addressing that as well, because sometimes those children fall through the cracks, and we want to make sure that we're keeping those children we're keeping them kind of like in our peripheral so that we know if what they're doing is just hiding momentarily or if this is something they do all the time and there's a bigger issue going on. And then we have dysregulation, and that's that hard to recognize emotional state. They might go from being happy to all of a sudden inconsolable crying, or difficulty being calmed or calming themselves. These are children who have difficulty with routines, or they fall asleep through, lunchtime, or they have feeding and mealtime problems. All very important to keep in mind. So these are some of the areas that the ASQ SE2 covers. I want to define them because it is important in order to know what types of questions will be asked. So self-regulation, These items address the child's ability or willingness to calm and settle down or adjust to physiological or environmental conditions such as stimulation, right? Sometimes when there's loud noises, the child kind of screams, covers their ears, and cannot handle it. These are the types of things that we're looking for there. We have compliance. These items address the child's ability or willingness to conform to the direction of others and follow the rules. Adaptive functioning, this is talking about the child's success in coping or ability to cope with physiological needs like sleeping, eating, elimination, and safety. So if they're tired, are they able to calm themselves and fall asleep wherever they are, or do they fight it and scream and kick and cause more issues than necessary? We have autonomy. These items address the child's ability or willingness to self-initiate or respond without guidance. We have affect, which is the child's ability or willingness to respond to or demonstrate his or her own feelings and empathy towards others. And then social communication, these items address the children's ability or willingness to interact with others by responding or initiating verbal or nonverbal signals to indicate interests or needs, feeling affective or internal states. And lastly, we've got our interaction with people, and these items address the children's ability or willingness to respond to parents, other adults, and their peers. So understanding some of these definitions help you to understand the intent behind a lot of the questions that you see on this questionnaire. So as you can see here, this is a little snippet of a 6-month questionnaire. And as you can see, the same way that I talked about the ASQ, the small print, this one shows you that it is a 6-month questionnaire, but you can use this same questionnaire with a child that is 3 months and 0 days through 8 months and 30 days. You see it says that in fine print at the very top. This questionnaire actually looks different because it's not broken down into the different domains. And it's got the highlighted areas here that you can see often or always, sometimes, rarely or never. And then it's got this additional area here for you to check if the behavior is a concern to you. All right. Then you'll notice there's a tiny little Z, a little V like Victor, and an X right next to the boxes. And those actually are those are the scoring codes. So for example, if you're filling this out and you're answering the first question, when upset, can your baby calm down within half an hour? If your answer is rarely or never, you would put an X there or color in the box. And then you might also check that is a concern because they can never calm down within half an hour. That's not typical. So that might be concerning to you. So that has an effect on the scoring, which we will see next right here. So this is the summary page. As you can see, it looks a lot more different from the ASQ3. And right next to the number 1 here, it says score items, and it gives you the scores that you need to put for each of the coding letters. So a Z is worth 0 points, a V is worth 5 points, an X is worth 10 points, and a concern is worth 5. So if you checked that additional box, that is concerning. Each interval of the ASQ SE2 has a unique summary sheet, and along with the optional item response sheet provides a summary of the entire ASQ as well as the follow-up actions that are needed. So as I mentioned before, it is not broken down into communication, fine motor, gross motor. It's just you're going to score each page as a whole. So in that middle section, you would total the points on page 1 and put them there, total the points on page 2, total the points on page 3, get your total score, and right there next to that 45, you would put the total score of the child. So if the child received a score higher than 45, then they are in the area of concern and we should refer them. That's what's important on this one. So the ASQ3, the higher the score, the better off the child is. It is the complete opposite for ASQ SE2. The lower the score, the better off the child is. So keep that in mind because it is the opposite and I don't want you to get confused. Adrian, are there any questions so far? This part can be a little confusing.
There is one question, and I'm not sure I understand it all the way. It says, how far could do ASQ2? I am not.
Does that mean like how many months? Like what's the oldest?
I don't know, and it says in the same child.
So the ASQ2 can be done up until 72 months. That's the highest it goes. And then, so you can do the ASQ SE2 as many times as you'd like, as long as you have the parent permission for a child that is not school readiness. I'm not sure if I answered that question because I'm not sure.
She says, okay. So did that answer your question? Okay, I'm not getting. Okay, she said yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, so moving on. Now it's time to discuss the results. Right? So when we do have concerns, it can be a difficult conversation to discuss with the families. You want to always keep in mind where the family is in the process. So there may be some parents that are relieved, like I knew something was going on. I'm so happy this kind of proves that. And what's the next step? What can I do? And then you may have the opposite where the parent is upset or disagrees completely and they're just not ready to accept those results. So you want to maybe listen and read those subtle cues, body gestures, facial expressions, and reflect back. If you share the concerns, be very specific. So if you're saying, you know, at school, I'm noticing the child is always walking on his tiptoes, be specific by saying that. You don't want to be too broad. You want to share exactly what it is that you're seeing. And then you want to review the factors to consider, like any health issues. Maybe mom will mention, oh, you know, she was premature. She didn't start walking until she was almost 2. So all of those things are going to play a role. And it's important to have that back and forth with the family to have that communication. Remember that you do not need to convince parents to refer for an evaluation. You want to support the parent in the referral when they are ready. And you can always use a rescreen as a good option, which gives the parent some time. So if the parent is not on board with a referral, you can say, okay, no problem. How about we work on these specific things and let's rescreen them in 2 months and see where they are. So remember, you want to always interpret the screening results with caution, debrief the results with the family. I can't tell you how many schools I talked to about an ASQ result and the school is kind of nervous or just has not mentioned it to the family. So then when I reach out to the family has no idea what an ASQ is or what it tells, and it can be shocking. So it's always really important to debrief the results with the family. You want to determine an appropriate follow-up together and always validate the family's cultural belief system. So in summary, screening tools can really help to bridge communication with families. They can assist in making referrals to community agencies. Referrals should be based on a variety of considerations in addition to the scores. Remember, like I mentioned, this child can fall in the typical range for everything and still benefit from a referral. Developmental and social emotional issues are very complicated, and use available resources to make decisions about what steps to take after screening. So here we have 0 to 3, which is from the National Center of Infants, Toddlers, and Families. It's an excellent resource. They have tons of free resources for providers and parents. If you check out the behavior and development section, you will gather a bunch of wonderful resources that you can also give to the families. And then they have an excellent journal with social emotional emphasis. We also have TAXI, which stands for Technical Assistance Center on Social Emotional Intervention. They're evidence-based best practice resources for decision makers, caregivers, and providers. We have the Backpack Connection series, which is an awesome resource. Many of us inclusion specialists will send that out to our providers or families when we're working with them. It just gives you a really easy to read, one sheet summary of how to best help with a particular social emotional skill that has not yet been reached. And now, if you could participate with me for the last time, if you could let me know on the spectrum where you are between a 1 and a 10 after receiving some of this information. How comfortable are you with the ASQs?
There are some 10s and 11s coming in, Carolina.
Yay! I'm so glad. Please remember that all of us inclusion specialists are available to help you with this at any time. So I'm going to provide my email here. If you're not sure who your inclusion specialist is, feel free to email me and I will find out for you and have that inclusion specialist give you a call, because we can help you with scoring. We can help you with talking to the families. You know, we're here for you guys to support you all. So please use us. Some websites I mentioned are here: 0to3.org, thechallengingbehaviors.org, and agesandstages.com. So if you want to take a picture of that. And then lastly, on the next slide, I have the number for the warm line, which you would reach Debbie K, who's our supervisor, and then you can let her know what the concern is, and she will dispatch one of us inclusion specialists, whoever is assigned to your school, in order to assist you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful day, and please, please feel free to email me if you have any questions. Adrian, are there any questions I should answer?
There are no questions.
Awesome. Okay, great. So I think we got out of here a little early, which is nice. Everybody enjoys the rest of their day, and I'll leave this up for a little bit longer in case you forgot to download the handouts.
Carolina, someone says that they really love your coaching and they really love your workshop.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. That means a lot. It's always nice to know there's somebody out there listening, because it feels like I'm talking to myself when I'm on these webinars. Okay, I see most of the people have gotten off, so I'm going to go ahead and log out. Thank you again, Adrian, for all of your help, and everybody who attended, thank you.